A high-tech surveillance network touted by San Diego police and elected officials is comically inadequate. An appeals court soundly rejects the scheme to finance the convention center expansion. And the Bar Association says funding cuts are crippling San Diego's court system. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, August 8th. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the Roundtable today, a reporter Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, reporter Liam Dillon, also from Voice of San Diego, and reporter Doug Sherwin of the San Diego Daily Transcript. Well, it was called Operation Secure San Diego. Begun in 2010, it was supposed to be a high-tech marriage of surveillance cameras with computers and police squad cars, and it was going to keep San Diego safer. Cops would have instant access to live images from cameras all over San Diego. And here's ex-Mayor Bob Filner touting the system in 2012, and will be followed by Officer Lloyd Cook explaining how it's supposed to work.
Operation Secure allows private cameras and private businesses to feed their live stream of security right into police cars. It helps our first responders. It helps our, obviously, any activity that the police are involved with.
So if I'm going to a location, I can bring up this graphical map, and these little red flags are where my cameras are. So I could click on it, and I'd go to the link, and I'd click on the video feed. And for instance, this one is Hoover High School.
Well, okay, it was supposed to be Operation Big Brother. It's turned out to be Operation Little Brother. What's happened here? What was it supposed to be, and what's the reality, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was that they basically said, look, there's already all these private cameras all over the city that all these smaller businesses, some of them are relatively elaborate systems that have 15, 20, 25 cameras. They're already all out there. If we can pull these resources together and put them into some centrally operating system, then we can kind of use them as the term that they used a lot was force multiplier, that would increase the effectiveness of the police force when they were responding to crimes, and specifically first responders would be able to go to an active shooter situation, and they would be able to pull up a live feed of what was happening, and they would know how they could respond. So that was the idea, and it wasn't really a secret. It wasn't like they were hiding this. It was on the front page of their website. They held press conferences.
Touted as we saw there.
Touted as there was. It got media coverage. It got media coverage, and then recently it occurred to us that we should maybe look into it a little bit and see how things were going.
How's that surveillance system?
Yeah, how's that surveillance system that we heard so much about 4 years ago, and then we heard a little bit more about it 2 years after that in 2012. And it immediately became clear that it must not have been working really well, because they didn't really want to tell us anything about it. So they said first of all, everything about the program, everything, is exempt for public safety reasons. So we don't have to tell you anything. It's not subject to public records. And then, contradictory to that, they said, here's a list of 41 places that have the cameras. Feel free to do with this what you want. And, oh, by the way, the program hasn't even been implemented yet. It's not operational.
2 years down the road.
Yeah, so I said, so we finally reached out back to him and said, help me explain this situation. At the very least, if it's not operational, what is this list of 41 cameras of?
Right.
What are they part of?
Right.
And long story short, one of the quotes was, it's operational, it just isn't 100% operational. Which is pretty funny.
Which is to say it's not really working at all.
Okay, I don't know what that means. But basically, so they have these 41 locations that have filled out the form that gives the police department access to the feeds.
Okay, so they got permission. You can use our images, roll up and see who the burglars are inside.
Right. Half of those can't be used at all because of compatibility issues between the software of the camera and the software that the department uses. Okay. So they didn't foresee that at all. That was a complete surprise. It was like, oh my goodness, different manufacturers use different software. So half of those addresses, the feed is useless. And then the other thing that they didn't foresee is that the police cars that were supposed to be able to pull up these live feeds to have this revolutionary response system don't have operating systems on their computer that are fast enough to pull up live feeds when they're in motion. So they need 4G modems in their computers to be able to really do anything with it. Right now, every car in the department system has a 3G modem. So half of the feeds are useless, and 100% of the feeds can't be accessed by the cars that are meant to make perfect use of them. So it's hardly the terrifying surveillance state that maybe we had in mind when we started.
The Orwellian fears haven't been realized.
Yeah,
well, and in your reporting, you learned that they're going to try and remedy this, right? I mean, they're going to try and get some of these cars up to speed here fairly soon to get the higher read rate, the 4G.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty open about the fact that this program hasn't done what they thought it would be able to do, that it hasn't been as successful as they'd like. They're trying to get 4G modems in their cars, but that's something they were going to have to do anyway.
Right.
They're doing ongoing back-end IT work to try to make these feeds more accessible, and they're still passively accepting forms from private companies that want to give their feeds to them, but they've stopped going out into the community and saying, hey, we've got this great program and you should really be a part of it, and we can help you out if you become part of it. Become part of this program. So now it's kind of just like if somebody decides on their own volition that they want to be part of it, they can be.
Right.
Yeah. And I wonder to what extent maybe you can speak to some of the larger issues here related to public safety versus sort of the concerns about over surveillance by police that we're sort of seeing a lot of in the news these days. You know, that was good to sort of understand it doesn't work now, but at some point when it might work, is this something that is going to be effective? Do we know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's ultimately what's important, right? There's been a forced decision that people have made, which is or some people at least, are willing to give up some level of privacy in exchange for some level of security. There's other people who disagree with this trade-off, but that's basically what's happened around the country and around the world. And right now, there seems to be some level of privacy that is being given up, and there's a complete inability to show whether there's any increased level of security that correlates with that loss of privacy. I mean, right now, what they said when I said, can you give me any indication that there's been any crime that has been solved or any issue that has been resolved, even with the help of Operation Secure San Diego? You don't have to say, if not for Operation Secure San Diego, this perp would be walking free. Just, did it help? And they said, maybe. We can't really say for certain. It might have been of great use. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. And they said, and we don't have a statistical tracking system that would tell us that in any certain terms. To me, I think there's a level of responsibility that if you're going to go out and actively request these feeds to bring them in and to do something that does result in a fundamental loss of privacy, that you take that responsibility seriously and you track to see if the public is getting some sort of return on that. And there doesn't seem to be a situation where that's happening right now.
But do you think once it gets up to speed, do you think it will be crossing some privacy lines? Do you think there's going to be more of a public outcry?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they've stopped talking about it to a certain extent, which seems to be their admission that this program hasn't gone anywhere. If it starts to go anywhere, it will be incumbent on them and on the media to ensure that they have these conversations about what is being given up. I think. And frankly, I think that those conversations should be happening right now, and hopefully that's going to start happening. But yeah, I mean, I think eventually, if this is a fully operational program, if this is a functional program, then that's a conversation that needs.
So to summarize, are there any plans to get this going? Specific budget line items to get this thing going?
No, what they've said is there's no specific budgeting for this program. It's all being operated by third parties. The things on their end are things that they have to do anyways. So they say there's been no money spent on it. Then again, we made a specific request to make sure that was the case, and that was one of the things that fell under their public exemption. So as far as more money being spent or what money is being spent now, that's not something we know right now. However, they have said that this pilot program at San Diego Unified Schools, there are 2 schools that have their cameras linked into this system. And in 2012, there was discussion about expanding that pilot program, and they said that they told me that they haven't completely given up on the thoughts of expanding that. All right,
so we'll see as we go along. I'm sure we'll do another follow-up and see how this thing comes together, if it does. All right, we're going to shift gears. City leaders were delighted when a Superior Court judge threw the legal holy water on a shaky scheme to finance a $500 million convention center expansion by taxing tourists. but their joy was temporary. A state appeals court reversed the original ruling, saying taxpayers had to approve the tourist tax by a 2/3 margin. And that was a big win for Gadfly attorney Cory Brigs. So, Liam, let's start with that plan. Give us the high points. How was it supposed to work? And they didn't collect any money, we should say.
They did not collect any money at this point, right. In one sense, it was super simple. Basically, people who stayed in hotels would pay more. What they paid would go towards expanding the convention center. That's a simple version of it.
So the tourists come in, they pay,
tourists come in, they pay
2% more on the hotel bills?
It would depend on where they were staying within the city. But yes, you go to stay at a hotel anywhere in the city, you're paying more. What you're paying is going to go towards the expansion. That's a simple way of doing it, or the simple way of explaining it. The problem fell in because they tried to make that significantly more complicated, which was having a vote of the hotel industry to impose that tax on their guests, on the tourism, on the actual tourists rather than the hotel businesses themselves. And so they tried to do that sort of in a very kind of convoluted and complicated way. And the reason for that was to sort of avoid the situation that we're in now, which is likely there would have to be some sort of public vote rather than a hotel business vote for this thing to happen. And so it's sort of a calculated risk that it was more likely that this plan was going to withstand legal muster than people would vote for it on their own. But it turns out, looks like that didn't work out.
All right. The attorney who was successful in blocking this was Cory Brigs, as I said at the opening. Here's what he had to say on KPBS this week about his successful lawsuit.
You had a group of people approving a tax, namely the hoteliers, who stood only to benefit. They bear no burdens whatsoever from the additional cost of a tourist coming to San Diego. In our society, the Constitution says that when you have a funding mechanism like that, it's called a tax, that everybody has to vote on it. In this case, the problem of coming up with a way of paying for the expansion was worse than the cure, or the cure was worse than the problem, because the cure is disenfranchising all of us in our right to vote.
Now, looking at that original scheme again, wouldn't this make San Diego less of a competitive city with other convention cities if you're really jacking this tax up on folks who are coming here and buying hotel rooms?
Well, if you subscribe to the theory that anytime you raise any taxes, that makes situations less competitive, sure. But the boosters of this would argue the exact opposite, which is that right now the convention business is kind of a shrinking pie. Right, less people are going to conventions and meetings. It's easier to have teleconferences and things like that. So as a result, and all other cities around the country are expanding their convention centers. And so we need to make sure, San Diego is a great place to visit, that we get the biggest bang for the buck and the biggest conventions. And to do that, you have to have a big center. And so if we have a bigger center, we can accommodate the giant conferences, and those conferences that are rich too. When the doctors come to town, when the engineers come to town, they have a lot of money to spend around, and they're the conventions that the city wants to attract. Can't attract now because the convention center is too small.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the funny thing about that to me is that the convention center pie is shrinking, and the space pie, the convention center space pie in every city in the country is expanding at the same time in this competition.
Right.
And so these two things are happening simultaneously, and every single city is making these same calculations that the city of San Diego is making.
Yeah.
But not only are they competing for finite convention, it's a decreasing amount of resources, basically.
Absolutely.
And yet they're spending more and more money, and it's locked into this arms race type situation.
Well, let's talk about that expansion for a second. Do we really need, ComicCon is the big dog in town. We keep saying that it's outgrown this convention center. We've got to expand. If we're going to keep ComicCon and get other mega conventions here, we've got to do this. But, we had ComicCon here a couple of weeks ago. The New York Times did a story toward the end of that saying that the geeks don't spend. They don't have the money. They're not buying. They're couch surfing. They're eating at Subway. And maybe it's more lucrative to have the mid-size or the smaller. Do we even need this expansion?
Well, ComicCon themselves have not threatened to leave. It's sort of similar.
Yeah, that was the other thing.
It's sort of similar to the Chargers. The Chargers say, "Well, we've never threatened to leave. Just everybody else around sort of
speculates
that you might go." And it's been sort of similar with ComicCon. Look, you go down there, it's just a zoo, right? It's just a ton of people. They are bigger than the convention center is. They're having events all over downtown, in some of the nearby hotels, and so
spread all over the place.
Yeah, and so I'm sure they could benefit from a larger center the same way some of the larger conventions could also benefit from a larger center. But again, there's been sort of no direct threat from them that they leave unless the expansion happens.
So is it worth $500 million to expand this thing, or what?
Well, I was thinking that taking a look at it, there's an easier way to get more space at the convention center without building more rooms. Because then a lot of the talk is ComicCon, right? Just make ComicCon 2 more days, make it a whole week. All of a sudden, you've just increased the amount of space you need by a quarter.
Yeah.
And it's something very simple, and you're not spending taxpayer dollars, this money, for a building that for 11 and a half months of the year will go unused. I mean, I don't hear of any other convention where they're saying they're not going to come here because we haven't expanded.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's just Comic-Con. Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Chargers are jumping into the fray here, saying something similar, saying, look, we have a solution here. But their solution, of course, is just build us a stadium, and we'll call that part of the convention center, which is...
So it would be football games, which limited number compared with, of course, baseball games in a publicly financed Petco Park nearby. But all the other days of the year, you could spill over. You could use it, as Doug's suggesting, for spreading that out.
And for their part, the convention center people and the port and others involved in that industry have been pretty unequivocal about the fact that that's not a good solution. That conventions don't want to send people 5 blocks away.
All right, I wanted to get back to for a moment to Cory Brigs, the attorney who's the ubiquitous attorney, and you've profiled him recently. Tell us about him and about some of the other lawsuits that he's pushing against the city.
He's quite a character. So you might remember him, in addition to this convention center, as being one of the people who sort of first blew the whistle on Bob Filner.
Right.
And so he was part of the 3
Donna
progressive
Fry and
folks.
Marco Gonzalez.
Exactly, yeah. So he's sort of well known in the city for that as well. But around the state, he has sort of a different reputation. The California environmental quality law is sort of the most sort of notorious or also famous law in the state, which sort of is an environmental law that also serves for basically any major project has to go through this very lengthy process of getting an environmental review.
And he plays it like a drum.
He plays it like a drum. No lawyer in the state files more lawsuits under this law than Cory Brigs, which earns him sort of the enmity of a lot of developers in the state as a result.
In cities up and down the state.
Cities up and down the state. Cities say, listen, we want to build I spoke with the mayor of Chino, who said, listen, if you want to build a birdhouse in Chino, Cory Brigs is going to sue you, right? And so he's been successful at sort of adding, as part of settlements for this, adding some solar panels or things that are kind of environmentally friendly. But he's also been successful at living in a very nice house and having some good wealth come out of this.
So he makes money this way. And before we leave this topic, get us back to the convention center. Yeah. Who pays his fee on that convention center lawsuit?
Well, the appellate court said he's entitled to fees. Okay. So there you go.
So the city, and he was successful on behalf of the public, environmental standpoint.
Yep.
All right, fascinating stuff, and I'm sure we haven't heard the last from Cory Brigs. Well, we'll turn to another topic. It's a well-known legal maxim, justice delayed is justice denied, and a report this week released by the San Diego County Bar Association painted a bleak picture of how funding cuts over the past few years are delaying cases and justice in myriad ways here in San Diego. So, Doug, start by telling us what that report says. What's the high points?
Well, that the justice system or the court system in California had, lost $1.2 billion between 2007 and 2012.
Oh, huge hit then.
A huge hit.
Funding.
So now the Brown is trying to say, okay, I believe that we need to restore the funding.
Gone too far. Yeah.
It's gone too far, and what he's done is not made any more significant cuts, but really hasn't added any more money either. Just to provide the services they're providing now, the courts said they needed about $200 million, and they call that their treading water budget. So
another $200 million just to keep at the level they're at now, which everyone in the system says is inadequate.
Exactly, and they got $85 million. So well short, and it's just it's creating real world consequences. I mean, for example, to process a default judgment, which when a defendant fails to respond to a lawsuit, can take 6 months when it used to only take 2 weeks. There's, an 8-week backlog on the issuance of misdemeanor warrants for failure to comply with a court order. And another one that I like is landlords who have tenants who can't pay the rent and they want to evict them.
They want to boot them out, yeah.
They can't. So they're having to wait 7, 8, 9 months until they can legally evict them. And with California law, they have to still provide services like maintenance and parking for the tenant. So the tenant could just wait it out and live rent-free, and the landlord can't do anything about it because of the long lines and the delay and the backlog of court cases that this deficit has created.
And so if you file a civil suit, it's going to take that much longer to get to trial. It's affecting the marriage and the family court systems.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot.
And what about on the criminal side? Now, we've talked pretty much so far about the civil side.
Well,
there's a priority, is there not, on criminal cases?
Yeah.
Because
so
the constitutional right to a speedy trial,
exactly.
for example. Yeah.
So right now, most of the brunt is being felt, if not all, on the civil side, because there are constitutional protections on the criminal side.
Okay, very good. Andy, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to me that this is, it's almost something that makes you think, why aren't people paying more attention to this? You see something like family court appointments going from 2 weeks to 2 months, and that was on the lower end of the delay, but you're talking potentially serious life-changing situations that are taking, four times as long to play out.
I noticed in one story about this on a statewide level that folks who they already had their marriage dissolved, they'd found someone else, they wanted to get married, and the backlogs kept them from getting the ink signed on the divorce papers.
Right.
This kind of impact.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times you can prevail in a case, but to actually get the rewards of that victory are taking long simply because of the backlog.
So I wonder, the Jerry Brown has been adamant, going all around the state, saying California's back, our budget's back, the economy's back, we're reinstating all the services that we cut during the recession. What's it going to take to get the court to the point that they're doing, not just treading water, but actually getting to the point that they're doing what we expect of them? Yeah,
they need more funding. They really do. The San Diego Superior Court budget, they're going to have a $6 million deficit because of increased operating costs next year.
What's our overall budget of the ballpark on that?
It's $167 million right now.
And so you're still looking at another, as you say, $6 million cut?
Yeah, and then $3 million the next fiscal year. And, San Diego Superior Court has been really good about they saw this coming down the road, and they've made little cuts here and there, and they had stashed reserves, but now the reserves are gone. There's no more fat to cut. They're getting into the muscle and bone right now.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, speaking back on the civil side, that you used to be able to get a court reporter, get a transcript. If there's an appeal situation, for whatever purpose, you need a transcript, and that's kind of out the window. That's one of the direct impacts of this,
If you want a court reporter at your case, you have to pay for it. And a court reporter is crucial for appeal because you have an actual record of what went on in the court. If you don't have that, you can't appeal your case. Right. It makes it very difficult. And so for a lot of clients, don't have the money to pay their attorney, and now you're having to pay for a court reporter.
So it's just a much bigger hill to climb if you want to file a lawsuit. Absolutely. And what have the San Diego Superior Court's done here? They tried to find some efficiencies. They've tried to streamline some things to mitigate the cuts, right?
Yeah, they tried to make some earlier cuts, and they've now are doing their information technology inside instead of outsourcing it.
Because they had lag, right? I mean, the paper mounds and the mountains of paper in the court system had, while other agencies and other parts of government had become far more efficient and more computerized and digitalized, well, we've seen the courts really lag. I've noticed that here covering cases.
Yeah, it has, and they're starting to get better at that. They've been doing for the last several years, trying to slowly implement, a paperless system where people can file e-documents.
Mm-hmm. So maybe there's a bit of a silver lining there.
Well, sort of. I mean, and just as a sort of a member of the public who tries to go and find information about court cases, it's extremely difficult in San Diego to be able to do that. In part because everything's on paper. I mean, particularly on the criminal side, it's shocking. I mean, you go in and ask for a file, and you have to wait in line for like an hour, and then you have to wait for the file, which takes 10 minutes, and then when you have to give the file back, you have to wait. And rather than having a series of computers where either whether from your home or from
sit at your desk and
totally,
look that thing up.
totally. I mean, the federal court system costs money to be able to do that, but at least you can look at sort of at your convenience, which saves the ability of having 15 different clerks having to run around to try to get literally paper files.
Right. Yeah. I remember Judge Timothy Taylor, who he ruled on some very high-profile cases, Sandag's long-term transportation plan, Balboa Park, but he begins a lot of his most high-profile rulings with a lengthy diatribe about the effects of the budget cuts on the system and how it's delaying justice and all this.
We're going to have to see how this plays out and cover this as we go along. I appreciate it. All right, that wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Keats of Voice of San Diego, Liam Dillon, also from Voice of San Diego, and Doug Sherwin of the San Diego Daily Transcript. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.